Every morning at 6 a.m. he would arrive, walk straight to lane 7, set up a single target, and fire exactly 30 rounds. Never missed, never spoke. Other shooters thought he was just a quiet old man, until that morning when young sniper instructor Jake witnessed his grouping technique. 300 yards, 30 shots, 1 hole. Jake had never seen anything like it, and the old man's rifle was just an ancient bolt action, no modern equipment whatsoever. When Jake approached, what he saw in the man's eyes froze him cold, because those eyes carried the look that could only be earned in one place, in one way. Welcome to Unhidden Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of precision, respect, and forgotten mastery, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. Some legends hide in plain sight. The high desert shooting range in Arizona opened at 6 a.m. sharp, but Harold "Hal" Brennan was always there by 5:45, sitting quietly in his weathered Ford pickup, waiting for the staff to unlock the gates. He'd been coming here every Tuesday and Thursday for 8 years, same routine, same quiet precision. Hal was 72 years old, with silver hair and hands that showed the wear of decades, but still held steady as bedrock. He wore the same clothes every time, faded jeans, a plain flannel shirt, and a baseball cap with no insignia. Everything about him said, "retired grandfather." Nothing suggested the precision instrument he became when he picked up a rifle. Jake Morrison, 25, was the range's youngest instructor and a recent graduate of the Army's sniper school at Fort Benning. He'd been watching Hal for 3 months now, intrigued by the old man's ritual. While other shooters brought cases full of modern equipment, multiple firearms, and enough ammunition to supply a small army, Hal carried only a single rifle case and 1 box of .306 ammunition. That morning, Jake decided to pay closer attention. Hal walked directly to lane 7, the farthest from the building and the crowd. He opened his case to reveal a rifle that made Jake do a double take. It was a 1950s Winchester Model 70, completely stock. No modifications, no scope, just iron sights and wood that had been lovingly maintained for decades. Jake watched through binoculars as Hal set up his target. Not at 100 yards like most recreational shooters, not even at 200 yards where most of the serious shooters practiced. Hal clipped his target to the 300-yard marker. The target itself was unusual too. Not a silhouette, not a bullseye, just a simple white circle, maybe 2 inches in diameter. Hal took his time loading the rifle. Each cartridge was inspected, each movement deliberate. He settled into his shooting position with the fluid economy of motion that spoke of thousands of repetitions, muscle memory burned deep. When Hal fired his first shot, Jake noticed something immediately. The report was different, not louder, but cleaner. The kind of sound a rifle makes when it's been perfectly maintained and fired by someone who understands exactly what they're doing. Jake pulled up his spotting scope to check the 300-yard target. The shot was dead center of the white circle. "Lucky shot," Jake muttered to himself. The second shot followed 30 seconds later. Same position on the target. Then the third, fourth, fifth. By the 10th shot, Jake was paying full attention. By the 20th, he was moving closer to get a better view. And when Hal fired his 30th and final round, Jake understood he was witnessing something extraordinary. Through the spotting scope, the target showed what looked like a single bullet hole. 30 shots, and they'd all gone through virtually the same point. Jake had been shooting competitively since high school and professionally for 3 years. He'd seen Olympic marksmen, military snipers, and some of the best shooters in the country. What he'd just witnessed was beyond any of them. As Hal began cleaning his rifle, Jake approached the bench. "Excuse me, sir, that was incredible shooting." Hal looked up, nodded politely. "Thank you. Would you mind if I asked where you learned to shoot like that?" Hal continued cleaning his rifle. "Long time ago, different place." Jake persisted. "Military?" A pause. "You could say that." "What branch?" Hal finished cleaning the barrel, began reassembling the rifle. "Marine Corps." "When did you serve?" 68 to 72. Jake did quick math. Vietnam War. But that didn't explain the shooting he'd just witnessed. Plenty of Vietnam veterans came to the range, and while they were good shooters, none demonstrated this level of precision. Sir, with respect, I graduated sniper school last year. I've seen the best shooters in the military. What you just did, that's not standard Marine training. Hal stopped reassembling his rifle and looked directly at Jake for the first time. What's your name, son? Jake Morrison, Staff Sergeant, Army. You said sniper school? Yes, sir, Fort Benning. Hal nodded slowly. Good school. They teach you about the old days? Old days? Before laser rangefinders, before ballistic computers, before scopes that practically shoot for you. Jake sensed he was about to learn something important. Some, but not much. Sit down, Hal said, gesturing to the bench beside him. In Vietnam, Hal began, we didn't have the equipment you boys have now. No fancy scopes, no weather meters, no calculators, just iron sights, Kentucky windage, and whatever you could learn from the man next to you. You were a sniper in Vietnam. Designated marksman. Different thing back then. We didn't have the formal sniper programs you have now, just Marines who could shoot straight when it mattered. Jake leaned forward. How many confirmed kills? Hal was quiet for a long moment. That's not a question you ask, son, and it's not an answer I give. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean... What you meant was to understand what you just saw. I'll tell you what you need to know. I spent 2 tours in Vietnam. First tour was standard infantry. Second tour, they found out I could shoot. Hal's voice became quieter, more distant. Got attached to Force Recon. Long-range patrols, target interdiction, things that don't appear in official records. Jake recognized those terms. Force Reconnaissance was the Marine Corps elite unit, the predecessors to modern special operations. The shooting you saw today, that's what happened when you spend 400 days in the jungle with a rifle that better not fail you. When missing means your squad doesn't come home. When you've got one shot to make the difference between mission success and mission failure. But that grouping was impossible. 30 rounds through the same hole at 300 yards with iron sights. Hal smiled for the first time. Son, you're thinking like a civilian, like someone who shoots paper targets for fun. When you're shooting to save lives, impossible becomes necessary. Let me ask you something, Hal continued. At sniper school, what's the first thing they teach you? Fundamentals, breathing, trigger control, sight alignment. And what's the most important? Jake thought. Breathing? Wrong. The most important thing is knowing why you're shooting. Every other skill builds from that purpose. Hal stood up, shouldered his rifle. You want to learn how to shoot like that? Stop shooting at targets. Start shooting with purpose. I don't understand. Those 30 rounds I just fired? Each one had a reason. Each one represented something that mattered. You shoot at paper, I shoot at memories. Until you understand the difference, you'll never shoot like that. Jake was processing what he'd heard when Hal made an unexpected offer. You free next Thursday morning? Yes, sir. Bring your rifle. The fancy one with all the equipment. I'll show you something. What's that? How to shoot like it matters. As Hal walked away, Jake called after him. Sir, I didn't get your name. Hal paused at the gate. Harold Brennan. But the guys I served with called me Ghost. That nickname hit Jake like a physical blow. He'd heard that name in military circles, whispered stories about a Marine sniper in Vietnam who was so effective, so elusive, that enemy units would abandon entire areas rather than risk encountering him. Jake had assumed those stories were legend. Now he wasn't so sure. That evening, Jake spent hours on military history websites and veteran forums. Harold Ghost Brennan wasn't hard to find once you knew where to look, but the information was sparse and heavily redacted. What Jake could piece together painted a picture of one of the most effective long-range specialists of the Vietnam War. Multiple confirmed long-distance kills, successful completion of impossible missions, and a reputation for appearing and disappearing like smoke. One forum post from a former Force Recon Marine was particularly revealing. Served with Ghost in 71. Man could put a round through a specific button on an enemy uniform at 800 yards. Never missed when it counted. Saved our unit more times than I can count. Disappeared after the war like he was never there. Another post. Ghost Brennan was the real deal. Everything they say about modern snipers, he was doing with iron sights and instinct. Legend among legends. Jake realized he'd been given an opportunity that most shooters would never receive. Direct instruction from a living legend. Jake arrived at the range Thursday morning with his standard sniper rifle, a precision instrument worth more than most people's cars, equipped with advanced optics, adjustable stock, and every technological advantage modern military engineering could provide. Hal was already there, of course, rifle case beside him on the bench. "Brought the fancy equipment, I see," Hal observed. "Yes, sir. This is what we use in the field. And I'm sure it's very effective. Set up at 400 yards. Jake was surprised. 400? I was expecting 300 like yesterday. Yesterday was demonstration. Today is education. Jake set up his target and returned to the firing line. Hal had assembled his ancient Winchester and was studying the range through a pair of equally ancient binoculars. Winds coming from the southeast, maybe 8 miles per hour. Temperatures 74 degrees, humidity's low. Hal rattled off the conditions like he was reading them from instruments, though Jake could see he was relying entirely on experience and intuition. "First thing," Hal said, "forget everything your rifle can do for you. All that equipment is just compensation for what you should be able to do naturally." "I don't understand." "Your scope calculates drop. Your rifle adjusts for wind. Your computer tells you what the bullet will do. But what happens when that equipment fails? What happens when you're in a situation where you can't rely on technology?" Hal chambered around in his Winchester. "Watch this." Without any preparation that Jake could see, without consulting any instruments or making any adjustments, Hal fired a single shot. At 400 yards, the bullet struck dead center of the target. "How did you—" 30 years of practice, but more importantly, 30 years of understanding that the rifle is just a tool. The real weapon is up here. Hal tapped his temple. For the next 2 hours, Hal taught Jake things that weren't in any manual. How to read wind by watching the grass 200 yards down range. How to judge distance by the clarity of details on the target. How to control breathing not just for the shot, but for the minute before the shot. "Your equipment makes you dependent," Hal explained. "My method makes you capable." Jake fired his precision rifle, achieving good groups but nothing approaching Hal's level of accuracy. "You're fighting the rifle," Hal observed, "trying to make it do what you want instead of working with what it's telling you." "What's it telling me?" "That you don't trust yourself. Every adjustment you make, every time you check your scope, every calculation you run, you're second-guessing your instincts." Hal took Jake's rifle, fired 5 quick shots without any of the preparation Jake had been using. The group was tighter than anything Jake had achieved with his own weapon. "But you don't know this rifle." "I know shooting. The rifle is just the delivery system." As they cleaned their rifles, Hal shared the deeper lessons. Modern military training focuses on equipment and technology. That's good. It keeps soldiers alive and missions successful. But it can also make you forget that at the core, shooting is about decision-making under pressure. Decision-making? Every shot is a decision. When to fire, when to wait, when to move. The rifle just executes the decision. If the decision is good, the shot will be good. If the decision is bad, no amount of equipment will save you. Jake was beginning to understand. "So when you shot yesterday, 30 decisions, each one based on purpose, conditions, and consequences. The rifle just followed through." "But how do you get that level of consistency?" Hal stood shouldering his rifle case. "Same way you get to Carnegie Hall. Practice, but practice with purpose, not just repetition." As they walked toward the parking lot, Jake asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Mr. Brennan, why are you teaching me this? Why share these techniques?" Hal stopped, turned to face him. "How old are you, son?" 25. "I'm 72. The things I know, the methods I developed. They'll die with me unless I pass them on. But surely other instructors teach systems. I'm teaching you to think like a shooter. Hal paused. There's a difference. Jake sensed there was more to the story. Sir, can I ask why you stopped after Vietnam? With skills like yours, you could have had any military career you wanted. Hal was quiet for a long moment. War changes you, son. I came home and realized I needed to be something other than a weapon. Took 40 years to figure out I could teach without becoming that person again. Over the following months, Jake met with Hal every Thursday morning. Each session built on the last, teaching not just shooting techniques but the mindset behind them. Jake's official shooting scores improved dramatically. More importantly, his understanding of marksmanship evolved from mechanical process to intuitive art. Other shooters at the range began to notice. Jake started sharing some of Hal's techniques with fellow instructors, always crediting the source. Where did you learn this? One instructor asked after Jake demonstrated Hal's wind-reading method. From the man who wrote the book on it before there was a book. Word spread quietly through military circles. A few veteran Marines made pilgrimages to the high desert range, hoping to meet the legendary ghost Brennan. Hal was polite but reserved with most visitors, only opening up to those who demonstrated genuine respect for the craft rather than mere curiosity about the legend. 6 months after their first meeting, Hal presented Jake with a challenge. There's a competition next month. Precision rifle, long distance, mix of military and civilian shooters, some of the best in the country. You think I should enter? I think you're ready to find out what you've learned. The competition was held at a range in Colorado with stages ranging from 300 to 1,200 yards. Jake competed with his military rifle but applied Hal's principles, reading conditions naturally, trusting instinct over instruments, shooting with purpose rather than mere precision. He didn't win the overall competition, but he achieved something more important: consistency across all distances and conditions. While other shooters excelled at specific ranges or struggled when wind conditions changed, Jake adapted smoothly to each challenge. Most significantly, he fired a perfect score at the 800-yard stage using only iron sights, drawing amazed comments from competitors and observers. Jake returned to Arizona with new respect for what Hal had taught him, but more than that, he understood his responsibility to carry the knowledge forward. How did it go? Hal asked at their next Thursday session. Better than I expected, but I learned something else. What's that? This isn't just about shooting. It's about approaching any challenge with the right mindset. Hal smiled. Now you're starting to understand. I want to incorporate some of your methods into my instruction at the range, with your permission. Son, these techniques don't belong to me. They belong to every shooter who's willing to learn them properly. Jake began teaching informal classes at the range, focusing on fundamental marksmanship without reliance on equipment. He called them heritage shooting courses, honoring the traditions Hal represented. A year later, a military magazine ran an article about the resurgence of fundamental marksmanship training. Jake was interviewed as a rising instructor, but he made sure the article focused on Hal's contributions to modern shooting technique. The article described Hal as a living link to an era when shooters succeeded through skill rather than equipment, when precision was achieved through understanding rather than technology. When the magazine offered to interview Hal directly, he declined. The teaching is the recognition, he told Jake. I don't need a magazine to tell people what I accomplished. But the article did achieve something important. It brought other old-school marksmen out of retirement, connecting a network of knowledge that had been scattered to the winds. 2 years after their first meeting, Jake was offered a position as head instructor at a premier shooting academy. He accepted, but only after ensuring he could continue training at the high desert range with Hal. You don't need me anymore, Hal pointed out. Maybe not for shooting, but I still need to learn how to teach what can't be taught. Their Thursday mornings continued, but now other students joined them. Young military marksmen, experienced hunters looking to improve, even some older shooters who wanted to reconnect with fundamental skills. Hal remained the quiet center of these sessions, demonstrating techniques that seemed impossible until you understood the decades of experience behind them. Some masters announced themselves with credentials and certificates. Others proved themselves through competition and recognition. But the rarest masters are those who perfect their craft in silence, carrying knowledge that could revolutionize their field, waiting patiently for the right student to appear. Harold "Ghost" Brennan spent 40 years being invisible after Vietnam, carrying techniques and wisdom that most modern shooters couldn't imagine. One morning, a young instructor named Jake Morrison was curious enough to ask the right questions, and everything changed. Not just for Jake, but for everyone who learned that the most advanced shooting technique is sometimes the oldest one, practiced by someone who learned it when missing wasn't an option. The high desert shooting range still opens at 6 a.m. every Tuesday and Thursday. Hal still arrives at 5:45, still walks to lane 7, still fires exactly 30 rounds with his 1950s Winchester. But now he's not alone. Now there are students, and those students are becoming teachers, and the knowledge that almost disappeared into silence is being passed forward to another generation. Have you ever met someone like Hal? Someone whose quiet mastery redefined what you thought was possible? Tell us their story in the comments, because at Human Stories, we believe the greatest teachers often wear no badge of authority except the quiet confidence that comes from decades of doing something perfectly. Subscribe if stories like this matter to you, because every field has masters hiding in plain sight, and they're waiting for someone curious enough to ask the right questions.